Namaste everyone. I'm Shweta, and on behalf of Jammu and Kashmir Study Center, I would like to welcome all of you to today's webinar on the World Refugee Day. This day is marked to empathize and understand the plight of refugees and the resilience with which they have tried to build their lives. India too has its share of refugees, and sadly, it includes the Kashmiri Hindus who have been internally displaced and have become refugees in their own country. The story of World War II Holocaust is well known and well documented. But does the world know much about the Kashmiri Pandits and the genocides they had to face in the name of their religion? Has the world truly understood the circumstances and the ideology that led to their ethnic cleansing? As recently as 1990, the Pandit community was subjected to gruesome targeted killings. An atmosphere of intense fear was instilled by terrorists and their sympathizers. Young and old Pandit men were kidnapped, tortured. Many Pandit women were abducted, raped, and some brutally slaughtered. This hostile environment compelled 500,000 Kashmiri Pandits to leave their homeland overnight in fear of life and limb. Sadly, this did not catch the world's attention. Lack of internet and social media could be a plausible reason. But compare this to the Bosnia uprising around the same time, where there were strong interventions by organizations like NATO. Whereas in Kashmir, an entire community was uprooted and exterminated from their millennium-old Ado due to an extremist ideology that was sponsored and fueled by Pakistan. And the world's response, along with the response of the then administration, was dismal. The Kashmiri Pandits have been failed by the world community. In this session, we will bring to you some of those first-hand experiences and also try to find some answers through our acclaimed speakers of the day. Our first speaker will be renowned actor Sanjay. He is deeply entrenched in his art with several solid performances under his belt, including Pinjar, My Brother Nikhil, and Chankar Beats. While most of us know him as an actor, many probably don't know that he is a Kashmiri and his family was also a victim of the 1990 exodus. Today, he'll be telling us his story. Please welcome Sanjay Suriji.
Good afternoon and good evening. Thank you very much, Shwetaji. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, Sanjay.
Yes. And thank you, Mr. Tikku, for inviting me to speak and share our experiences as a testimonial and on World Refugee Day. I wish I wasn't qualified to speak today as a refugee, but fate had other plans. Since I have been invited and there's some esteemed speakers, so I've been given an opportunity to begin first, and I'll keep it short. As an experience of and feelings of 3 decades, almost 3 decades, yeah, precisely 3 decades. It's pretty impossible to explain in about 10, 15 minutes, but I shall try. So allow me, as I wrote down a few words, a few lines, so that I don't digress, which I thought was a possibility with emotions emerging. So forgive me because I'm going to read what I wrote today, and I hope it'll give you a little insight of our personal story, my story. It is not from an article, it is not from any news channel, it is not from any book. It's absolutely the story of our family. Just to give you a little background, to give it a context, I'm the 4th generation in Kashmir. My maternal grandfather about 100 to 110 years ago lived in Baramulla, and paternal grandfather lived in Srinagar. My maternal grandfather was a forest officer, a botanist, and later was asked to manage the private estates of the Maharaja of Kashmir due to his immense knowledge of his subject. While then he worked in Srinagar, but the family stayed back in Baramulla until the Kabali raids happened in 1947, where my mother, along with the 5 sisters, with their mother, my nani and grandmother, had to move from Baramulla to Srinagar, saving their lives. That was actually the first displacement they experienced. Yeah. I shall read now. Yes, I was born and raised in Srinagar, Kashmir. I went to Burnhall School and later Gandhi College, which was in the interior parts of Srinagar. I would say I was brought up in a holistic way, living a very inclusive life in childhood amongst the brotherhood. You know, whether it was playing games, etc. It was all a very inclusive life. Growing up amongst the chinars, the tulips, the narcissus, and always looked forward to the next Vazwan, eating in the Trambi with my brothers and walking around the boulevard with sisters without any fear or threat. A roasted corn at the Chashma Shahi Bend near the Dal was a highlight, or even a swim in the Dal or Nagin Lake was a luxury. Culturally, a rich society with a long history. Of course, a garden full of variety of flowers, and not just one kind. I'd heard of wonderful stories of my mother cycling to Chashma Shahi Gardens in Parimahal in her college days, aunt studying in SB College, which then was a co-education, co-ed college, where women felt very safe. Any child growing up then in the valley would know that it was absolutely all right to be making friends anywhere and with anyone. I say this because many born post 1990 are not aware that such a life existed in Kashmir. Right from early years, I was fully into sports. And that's what I kind of sensed something was wrong. And I'll tell you how. It was the 1982 Asian Games hockey match with Pakistan. We had badly lost 1-7. It was not a normal day at school. It was the first time at the age of 11, and I remember this. I felt very odd at school along with some other friends. Many of us were laughed at because India had lost to Pakistan in hockey 1-7. I didn't quite understand why was this happening. Was I reading some other books? Was I not going to the same school? Was I eating and playing on some other grounds? Was I born somewhere else? Or was it that my name was Sanjay? I didn't quite understand at that age. I dismissed the feeling, but something stayed as gentle awareness of a child. From then on, I noticed that every cricket match where India lost was celebrated. I still remember when shutters came down at the news of then President of Pakistan, General Muhammad Ziaul Haq, air crash on 17th of August 1988. I was much older then. Schools and shops and establishments had to be closed down, of course. There was a holiday in school. I was much older. And sense that all this is propagated and fueled by some misled people who are creating mischief. The seriousness of things to come was not anticipated at all. Not by me, not by my family, and not by many. As we all know, in 1989, things changed. And things changed forever. I say this because it's never been the same for anyone, in fact. Since 89-90 until now, humanity has suffered deeply. So many people have lost their lives, so many homes destroyed, perhaps many generations lost. I wonder if anyone achieved anything, or what will be achieved, and at what cost. Events did take place earlier as well, but not of the magnitude of what happened in 1989 onwards. It's documented and part of this history as young as 30 years old, of sudden and selective targeting of the minorities. I say this because it's out of personal experience. On August 1st, 1990, it did become personal. Earlier, it happened to someone somewhere, but now it had hit home and hit hard. My very Kashmiri father, the late Virinder Suri, son of Kashmiri Lal Suri, grandson of Fakir Chand Suri, who lived in Kashmir since 1900s, early 1900s, was shot dead at home, 3 gunshots. He was a loved man, a popular man. He used to love going to the coffee house, excellent at billiards, and would play at the Amar Singh Club. Extremely popular amongst friends and family, a well-wisher for all was killed point blank at home by three unidentified young boys, leaving my mother a widow who ran after them bare feet shouting, "Mar gaye, mar gaye." They've killed him, they've killed him. No one came out of the colony, understandably out of fear of their own lives, perhaps. What shocked me further was that the police station wrote in their statement, "resident of Delhi," whereas my father, a state subject or voter, always lived in Srinagar and ran his business of a sawmill in Mandirbagh. The proof of that building, the proof of all this, lies in the ruins in Mandirbagh right now. Reason for killing him? Anyone's guess. Also, a soft target, which I like to mention, a soft target to create panic for many more to leave the valley. That was perhaps the modus operandi those days. Same questions came to me again. Was I reading some other books? Was I going to some other school? Was I born somewhere else? Or was it that my father's name was different? Very unfortunately, they made a communal selection for a family that was and still is extremely secular and peace-loving. My grandfather, then alive, said to his oldest son's corpse, "Son, you were brave. You never left." As by then, mass exodus had already happened. Because we're talking of 1st August 1990. My father decided not to leave. He never wanted to leave. Many we knew had already decided to leave, but he had completely refused to. Life changed from there on for all of us. The body was cremated in New Delhi as it was airlifted. The chief secretary that time, Mr. Tucker, organized and that his body can be lifted and taken to Delhi. Many we knew already had, sorry, so I lost my thought even while reading. Apologies. The body was cremated in New Delhi, and thousands of people who had left Kashmir attended his funeral too. The numbers were in hundreds and thousands displaced that time, earlier from January 19th, when the mass displacement happened. The people living in refugee camps, we were fortunate. A lot of support was given by relatives. We could live in their homes for months, actually years. And that's when the other challenge started. That's when a refugee experiences what happens, and especially in their own country. Humiliation of all kinds was common. That was the other tragic part of being a refugee. I still remember an officer asked me in Jammu, "Bring a proof that your father was killed." Of course, we all left without papers, etc. I was 19, full of anger and hurt, but I still understood that he was doing his due diligence. But he was probably in his 40s. He didn't know what and how it feels to lose life and home in a few minutes. So I actually forgave him, but I'd still remember. Today, an entire generation in the valley has changed. A whole new generation of people who were born post 1990 were too young to understand what was happening. I do hear them sometimes saying, "Kashmiri Hindu yahan se bhag gaye." Kashmiri Hindus ran away. We captured that emotion in my National Award winning film, I Am, as well. I really cannot question an ignorant kid on the road, but this statement disturbed me for years. This should have been answered by the older generation who were witness to all this during the 90s, during the largest displacement India has seen post-partition. It is not to blame anyone, but it is their duty not to distort history. That is as young as this one, and educate the youth that violence made all suffer and continues to do so. Mark my words, continues to do so. Many were made to run away, and many more fall prey to the business of war, even today in the valley. An eye for an eye will surely make the world blind, and it's happening right now. I strongly feel, it's probably my personal view, bridges can be built over a burning jail, but there has to be a strong and sustained will to do so from all. All have suffered, yes. All have suffered, all faiths have suffered, a culture wiped out, homes destroyed, but humanity is not lost, I hope. 30 years have gone by, I hope not another 30. I would like to conclude now with my last few lines. They say memory is a good place to visit, but not a great place to stay. Not forgetting can help you confront your ghosts from the past. But while we confront, we must look ahead. The idea of talking today was not to refresh my memory, as it never left me. But maybe somewhere someone can see the hopelessness of this violence, even after 30 years. Healing begins with acknowledgement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanjay ji. That was a very heartbreaking story, and it's probably the first time we have heard this aspect of your life, and we really appreciate you sharing your personal story and your views with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We would now like to welcome our next distinguished speaker, Ashish Dharji. He's somebody who has understood the knowledge gaps in our current Indian society and has helped address the same by creating many Indic platforms like Pragyata, an online magazine through which many thinkers are able to express their own study and thoughts on Indic civilization-related topics. Upward, an online channel that produces well-researched video content on critical issues plaguing the society, and his most recent venture, Freestream, which again produces simple, concise, and curated video content. An exiled Kashmiri Pandit, a writer, and a wonderful singer. We are very fortunate that he'll be sharing his thoughts with us today. Over to you, Ashish ji.
Thank you, Shweta ji. I'm so sorry, but how much time do I have exactly? So I'll time it accordingly. I don't want to waste anyone's time.
About 15 to 17 minutes, and then we'll ask you a couple of questions after that.
Sure. All right. Thank you, Shweta ji, and the entire team at JKSC for giving me this opportunity of speaking on this online event and to be part of this wonderful panel. I think Sanjay ji has so beautifully captured the personal aspect of what you could call everyone's story in Kashmir, right? So since I'm I'm speaking in a different line, I'm not going to get into my personal story, but I would actually start with saying that the losses that all of us have gone through. I don't think there would be any Kashmiri Pandit family who has not had a personal loss of some kind, right? And this, in fact, does not start from the 90s. This goes way back, right? If we were to trace our family history all the way back to the 14th century, the blood and gore would scare the wits out of us. My own, my wife's grandfather was killed in the Kabali raid in 1947. My own grandfather, he was one of the more well-known businessmen in the valley at that time. All his properties were looted, his shops gutted, and it was a riches to rags story overnight. And in 1989, my own maternal grandmother, my nani, was killed in a bomb blast. So you see, I mean, all of us have a tragic past, so to speak, and we kind of come at it from a very personal point of view. So it's sometimes very difficult to speak objectively about Kashmir because it's so close to your heart. But personally, I've made it my life's mission to be objective and reasonable about the discourse on Kashmir, because I believe that what has happened, but our stories can help others to not experience the same kind of tragedies that befell us. Again, I mean, speaking on World Refugee Day is kind of ironical because if you look at it, the title was never bestowed upon us. We are refugees by self-identification because, I mean, how else would you describe someone who's lost his home and is forced to live outside your native land and can't go back? So that's something that is obvious, but however, the honor was never given to us. But the implication of this non-bestowal of this title has been pretty deep and far-reaching, in the sense that we are an invisible people, except of course, except among well-wishers like this group. Uh, but as far as the powers that be are concerned, we have more or less been used and abused and not given the due recognition that we deserve. Um, the another implication and another outcome of being refugees is that everyone is free to have an opinion on us, right? Because no one really knows our status. So there are all kinds of opinions floating around about why we had to leave our homeland and why we can't go back and why we should go back and why we shouldn't go back and why we need to, sort of start an armed rebellion, and all kinds of stuff goes around without really an understanding, and understandably so, because something that you have not experienced, you are free to have an opinion unless there is an official version around it, unless there is a government version that says that, okay, this is what the problem really was, and this is how the problem will be solved. Given that it is not there, so therefore all this confusion, and this confusion is not just limited to people uh, who look upon us from the outside. It has also become uh, a problem within the community, because it's a psychological fact that there is a difference between your experiencing self and your memory, right? When you recall something, it is slightly different than what you experienced. So because of the trauma, a lot of the members of our own community have kind of forgotten where we came from and why we were kicked out in the first place, and we've become self-critical and in a lot of ways self-destructive. Again, I will stress on the fact that this is the reason behind all this is because of the indeterminacy of our status. Are we refugees, or are we just voluntary migrants, as they like to call us? So our story is popular, but it is not very well understood. Um, and though I will start from 1990, as I said before, the story goes back way back into the 14th century, where, I mean, when Kashmir came under the attack of alien forces, hostile forces. And I'll give you a small anecdote about how how things began to simmer. And we were like frogs in the proverbial frog in the beaker, which is being kept on a flame, where the temperature of the water is slightly, increasing bit by bit, and the frog does not even feel uncomfortable when it is boiling. Um, so if I remember correctly, in 1987, our house, we had a huge joint family, and our house was under renovation of some kind. And one of the bathrooms, the marbles were not aligned properly. I mean, the contractor had not done a proper job of it, and so there was a accumulation of water in the middle of the bathroom. So my aunt pointed out to the worker, the mistri, saying that, look, this is not, you've not done a good job, and you need to sort of fix this quickly. And she was a little stern with him. And the guy retorted, saying that, uh, look, sister, this bathroom and this whole house belongs to us. Why are you even bothered? You will have to eventually, hand it over to us. So anyway, she thought that this guy's kind of lost his mind. And over dinner, she discussed this, and she said that, this guy is a little crazy, because I told him to fix it, and he said that, this house belongs to us. So everyone had a good laugh. But turns out the last laugh was reserved for uh, the mystery, I suppose. I don't know if he actually got to use our house or not, but yeah, I mean, someone actually occupied it forcefully later on, as we came to know. Now, this tells us a very important thing about the nature of the problem, or the nature of the conflict itself. That it was not that the common people of Kashmir were not aware of what was happening. In fact, a lowly, I mean, not in a derogatory sense, but I'm saying someone as ordinary as as a daily wager, knew that there was something cooking, and he had the gall to tell my aunt that, you will not remain here for too long. And when the exodus happened, it was then that we realized the kind of conspiracy that was brewing. So we left, and it is interesting that when we actually left the valley, we actually left thinking that we will be going back in a few months. We left under terrible circumstances. It was like, I mean, as a child, I was 9 years old, and I remember the kind of trauma that I went through, where just outside our house there was cross firing going on. There were all kinds of slogans, and we had like blacked out everything, and we were hiding under the beds. The classic Holocaust tales that you read about from World War II. That was what was going on in Kashmir. And when we left, we still thought that we would go back because, hey, it was our home for 5,000 years. Who would think of leaving your native place? But interestingly, the Indian state actually made it impossible for us to go back. The Indian state at that time was headed by the Janata Dal government, and Mufti Muhammad Sayyid was the home minister. And he very quickly offered the community, the government servants, their salaries, and the unemployed some relief, like some trivial amount like 500 or 1,000 rupees. And basically, that was a message to the community that this is here to stay. Your exile is here to stay, and so don't think about going back for now. So that was kind of locking the door behind us. We had no way to go back. Possibly, if we had not gotten that kind of, I mean, you could argue that it was a compassionate step of the Indian state, but it actually sealed our fate that way. So in early 90s, there was this, I mean, the movement, the so-called Azadi movement, the Tehreek, was on an upswing. And in the early 90s, the Indian state was really grappling with the scenario of actually permanently losing Kashmir because it was so bad. And then, the rest of it, we all know that the security forces were sent and, things were gotten back under control. But in the early 90s, the Indian state found us as useful allies. And one of our demands, which was a separate homeland, because by the time in 6 months or so, we had kind of realized that this is a long haul and we are not going to go back. And so we had figured out that, look, if we are to go back, we are to go back to a place where our security is guaranteed. And so there was a resolution which was passed within the community, which had widespread acceptance. And the Indian state, the Indian government found it useful to endorse that implicitly. However, as the tensions in the valley got reduced, and the Indian government had a better grip on the affairs in the valley, our relevance started to again decline, because I mean, now the territory was under control, so you don't really need us. We are the invisible people anyway. So this was a paradox of some kind. Recently, and I'll move towards conclusion, and this is the major point that I want to make here. In a recent video that I did for Upward, I spoke about the distinction between territorial nationalism and civilizational nationalism. And I argued that territorial nationalism is what derives its vitality from the piece of land, from the borders, and from saying that, okay, India is a piece of land that stretches from this place to this place, and we all belong to this place for a long time, and therefore, we have to be united and work towards building a great country. So that's the kind of nationalism that territorial nationalism is. However, as the name implies, civilizational nationalism actually derives its vitality from our very identity, from our link with an unbroken link with India's great heritage and past. And that is the nationalism that is that is obviously more powerful and more empowering as well. Now, the why I make this distinction here is that the territorial nationalism is a concern. I mean, from the government's point of view, territorial nationalism is a concern for keeping territory, for keeping your territorial integrity in place, and that's a noble goal to have. There is absolutely no doubt about this absolute imperative. However, civilizational nationalism is embodied in the people. Civilization is carried by individual members of that civilization, the culture, and the culture is practiced by each and every one of us. If the Indian state is not a civilizational entity, and if it continues to deny that civilizational entity, it denies the identity of the Indian people, and specifically the Hindus. And you can always make claims for territory, but you will never care about the people of India. So we are those people. Why we are invisible is because the Indian state does not have that kind of an orientation, a civilizational orientation. And I would like to give you an example, a small example, before I wrap this up. Uh, in the run-up to the 2014 elections, the now Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, he addressed a rally called the Lalkar Rally, I think, in Jammu, in which there was like lakhs of people who attended it, and everyone was glued to the TV screen, including myself. And we thought that now he's going to, we were like great supporters. I continue to be a supporter of Mr. Modi, and we thought that he's going to say something about us. And he mentioned each small community of the state, the Dogras, the Bakarwals, the Gujars, the this, that, I can't even recall the names, but each small community, and conveniently forgot to speak about us. And it occurred to him later on as an afterthought. And then he issued a clarification on Twitter and stuff like that. Because we are invisible people, like I said, right? So the point that I'm trying to make here, and this is perhaps the crux of my small talk here, is that like we are invisible, like we don't have a status, we self-identify as refugees because we faced hard facts and we were given a reality check in 1990. But the same is true for all Hindus living in India. As long as the Indian state does not embrace and acknowledge its civilizational orientation, its civilizational responsibility, it will continue to overlook the interests of a vast majority of Indian people, that is the Hindus, and the Hindus will all be invisible. And the Hindus are invisible people. Our temples are not under our control. The state is not run according to the values that we endorse and want to live by. And there are so many things, whether you talk about the ecology, whether you talk about ordinary personal law, a lot of things are not according to our ethos. And by that definition, I think all of us, including you, are refugees, even though you may not know it. So that is the unfortunate fact of where we are as a community together, as the Hindu community, which is basically a plurality in itself. But let's just, for the sake of it, for the sake of identification, the Hindu community in itself is a refugee in their own land. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish ji. Kashmir always reminds me of the famous saying of historian Will Durant, who said that most of us spend too much time on the last 24 hours and too little on the last 6,000 years. So yes, Kashmir has a civilizational relevance for India, and that's true. So thank you so much. And we have a couple of questions for you. So Kashmir had seen exoduses prior to 1990. How different was the exodus of 1990? And was there a deeper understanding of the brutalities of a jihadi ideologue among the Hindus and other minorities, given that generations or a couple of centuries ago, Kashmir had seen such phenomena?
Yes. So the main difference between the latest and the final nail in the coffin and the earlier exoduses was this fact that earlier it was mainly the genocide was perpetrated by rulers, by the tyrants and despots that came to rule the unfortunate land of Kashmir from the 14th century onwards. But in 1990, it was a perverse democratic movement where your neighbors, your friends for decades, your own students, your own teachers, people with whom you had close ties, they betrayed you, and that was different. That never, I suppose, that never happened before, at least at the scale that it happened in 1990. Um, uh, and your second question, I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
What I wanted to say is that was there a deeper understanding of what happened, of the historical relevance of those exoduses, and were the Hindus were they able to see signs and understand better?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, although there was never, I mean, we were not clairvoyant and we never knew that this is going to happen to us. But as far as life in Kashmir goes, while I do agree with Sanjay ji when he says that, we did have great relationships, great friendships with people from the majority community at an individual level. But as communities, these were pretty much watertight compartments. And the cultures, even the language, the food, everything was different because we were actually at the bleeding edge of this clash of civilizations, as I've called it before. So the cognizance of that fact, the undercurrents were always there for everyone to see, even as a kid. And I'll give you an example again from my personal experience. That we were, I was about 5 or 6 years old from when I had a very conscious understanding of being a minority and being having to stick to my limits. Our house was routinely pelted with stones whenever India won a cricket or a hockey match, and stuff like that. So it was a reality which was hard to miss. Everyone knew that basically we are living lives of some sort of in some sort of oppression. But given that uh, we had like really deep roots in the soil of Kashmir, we could sort of take that in our stride. But yeah, I mean, the oppression was always there as far as we can remember.
Okay. And what about drawing parallels between different Hindu communities, like say Sindhis who migrated from Pakistan or the Bengali Hindus during partition? And when you present it as a cohesive voice, do you think that would help the world and the broader Hindu community see the bigger picture, as because the situations and experiences were kind of similar?
Oh yes, absolutely. I think that that is something that we should all consciously work for. And the main aim, as far as I'm concerned, look, I know, I mean, the political aim for our community is to stake claim on Kashmir and go back at some point in the future, and that's something that can never be compromised, and we should never let go of that demand. However, in practical terms, we should also be prepared to run the long race. Maybe I will not be able to go, but maybe my son or my grandkids, maybe they can go back. We should be prepared for such a scenario. And our main focus as of now should be on preventing such things from happening to other communities that are in vulnerable positions right now across India, whether it is in Kerala, whether it is in Bengal, or even in Bangladesh. Every single day in Bangladesh, you have something happening, something terrible happening to a Hindu family or a Hindu girl being abducted. And these are well documented facts. And I think that it is the responsibility of the Indian government again to assert their diplomatic power and prevent such things from happening to Hindus in any part of the world. And as a community, we should certainly join hands and work on this together. And the aim should always be futuristic, that this should not happen to anyone else.
True, very truly said. Thank you, Ashish ji, for all your insights. It's definitely gotten a lot of us thinking.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Most welcome. I will just ask my colleague Vinod ji to come on, and he has a question for Sanjay ji.
Thank you, Shweta ji. Sanjay ji, I have a question for you. You have been associated with the film industry for a number of years now, right? And when we talk about the film industry, it's seen as a torchbearer for espousing all the socio-cultural issues and bringing that to mainstream. And all we've seen with respect to J&K is a Mission Kashmir and a Haider in mainstream in the last so many years. So do you think film industry has failed Jammu and Kashmir and to highlight what happened there and the travesty that happened there in the 90s and even before that? And I'm not just talking about Kashmiri Pandits and what happened to them, but there are a number of communities in the entire region who have been affected by what has happened, not just in Kashmir, but also on our borders and in Jammu area as well. So why is film industry being so silent about this massive genocide that has happened in Jammu and Kashmir?
I'll give you two perspectives on this. First, I did make a film, which I mentioned, I am, because I'm an independent filmmaker. We often don't have the budgets to promote our films, and possibly the the film the audience is made for is not able to watch the film. For example, it may not get a release in Srinagar. It will not, because there are no theaters. It may not get a release in Jammu also because it's not popular cinema. Um, I request you to watch that film. There's one episode dedicated to Kashmir about um, a Hindu girl revisiting her roots after 20 years, played by Juhi Chawla, and meets her childhood friend, played by Manisha Koirala. It's um, it's uh, it's 20-25 minutes and one episode of the larger feature film. So I did do my bit. See, I think I'll be very honest. As a community or anyone who's gone through this kind of trauma, it takes a lot of time to to find some sense into things and get down to write or make something. Even books have taken 20 years, 25 years. You know, even Rahul Pandita's book took time. It was not that within 2 years he could write a book. Um, and who is going to make anything? We have to make it. And then comes a problem of being practical. Can you imagine how would it be allowed to shoot Exodus? Do you think I can shoot in Gaukadal, for example? Do you think I can shoot in Lal Chowk like that? So under the umbrella of mainstream, a lot of things can go by. But otherwise, it's not, it's because cinema it's a very expensive art form. And you will tell your stories, but you'll find ways how to tell them. Whenever I acted in a film called Firak, or there was a Parzania, or or even Marches, films have been made, but somehow you're right. Kashmir has sort of been, you know, not really understood and not really been told the way it could have been. But there are very few who would. I'll tell you, I crowdsourced my film, and I can say it in this forum. I had about 1 or 2% support from our community, and actually, my friends in Kashmir who helped us through these 3 decades, they helped out. You know, so sometimes we also shy away because we are, like Ashish saying, that somewhere, you know, it's ingrained in us. Look down and walk. So we could not. So either out of fear or something, they could not support the film. And my non-Hindu friends out of Kashmir supported the film. They gave us places to stay. They gave us places to eat. They actually even gave money because it was crowdsourced. So so there, which is why I say I have hope. But the problem is my generation probably is the last generation that has a connect. My kids are growing up in Mumbai. They may or may not have that connect. They have a connect as if they will go there, they'll spend the time and they will look around and all. But and that's happened to people, even a lot of Muslim families who have left and their kids are not connecting. So We have started going back every year now, every year. So it took 16 to 18 years. But my mother goes every year. Now she's got cancer twice, second time now. But we go, I take her, and I also try and go because, like he said, it's a civilization that umbilical cord cannot be cut. I hope that answers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay ji. Moving on, it gives me immense pleasure now to welcome our next speaker, Sananda Vashish ji. She's a writer, columnist, political commentator, and founder of My End Makers, a new age media company. She too has witnessed real terrorism back in Kashmir in 1990s. I still remember her lines in a recent US congressional hearing where she had asserted her identity with such conviction. My father is a Kashmiri Hindu, my mother is a Kashmiri Hindu, and I am a Kashmiri Hindu, and my home and lives were destroyed by radical Islamic terrorism. Indians worldwide had applauded her for having the courage to present the truth of Kashmir and exposing Pakistan in this lopsided panel hearing. Today, she's going to be talking to us on the way forward for minorities in Jammu and Kashmir, especially with respect to recent changes in J&K, including abrogation of Article 370 and the Domicile Act. Over to you, Sananda ji. A very warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Shweta-ji, and thanks to JK Study Circle. Thank you to Manu Khajuria-ji, who I see here, and she reached out to me. I have to tell you a little secret, and it does not get, I don't know why I'm sort of revealing the trade secret here. My job is to go ahead, for all my adult life, I have been talking about Kashmir other than my other work of political analysis. I talk about Kashmir everywhere. I speak in forums like this, but I have to tell you, a night before I have to speak, I live the trauma all over again. And I wish the morning never comes and we never see the sun in the morning. And that happened to me this morning. I am in Houston, United States, so this is early morning for me. So when I saw the sun rays in the morning, the same trauma, the same, that fear grips me again, that am I going to go through this all over again? And it's important for us to live through these memories like Sanjay did and Ashish did, to bring stories and tell people what happened to us and what is happening to us. Sanjay ji set the tone of this meeting today. He talked about his father. This is the first time I have seen him, although I knew the story very well, but this is the first time I have heard him speak about his father, first person. And my thoughts were with him, and my thoughts also went to the recent killing that we have seen in Kashmir of a Kashmiri Pandit, Mr. Ajay Pandita, the only Hindu Sarpanch in Anantnag area. There are other Hindu Sarpanchs, but he was the only Hindu Sarpanch in that area, only Hindu family living there. And he was shot dead in cold blood from behind, just like Sanjay ji's father. And I thought, 30 years have passed by. And what Sanjay ji was relating, Ajay ji's daughter related the same thing. 30 years, nothing had really changed. Unidentified people had come and they shot a person in broad daylight, and no one knows where they went. And no one knows who had shot them, what happened to those people, how do you commit a crime, how do you commit a murder and then run away? This, in short, is the history of Kashmiri Hindus. We have been shot in the back. People who have shot us, metaphorically and literally both, have run away. And there has been absolutely no way of, no one has helped us identify these people, even though we know who they are, but they have not been identified and they have not been made to face the law of the land. This has happened from Mr. Suri's killing to Mr. Pandita's killing. Nothing has changed in 30 years. Now, coming to this topic today, I was told to speak about our current situation and where we are headed. Sanjay ji gave a personal anecdote, which was very important to for everyone to know what was happening in Kashmir at that time. Ashish ji gave a very critical, very important civilizational connect about the whole story, because a lot of people miss it. It's very important to understand the broad picture, the civilizational connect. And I always said, it's very easy for our politicians to say that Kashmir hamara atut ang hai, but I always say that yes, there is no India without Kashmir, but there is no Kashmir without India either. I mean, it's both ways. India cannot exist without Kashmir. Kashmir cannot exist without India. It's not just a one-way thing. Kashmir is the bedrock of civilization. It is where the civilization, Hindu civilization, really is the cradle of civilization. So to think that India can exist without Kashmir or Kashmir can exist without India is unthinkable and cannot happen. Coming to, before I said I have about 15 minutes, and a lot has happened in Kashmir recently, but just to give you a brief thing, Ashish did mention that the honor of calling ourselves refugees was not bestowed on us by the powers to be. We are not Kashmir. What he forgot to tell you was the honor that was bestowed on us. And that nomenclature, the phrase that was used was migrants. So officially, we are called migrants. And I've always wondered, what is migrants? Migrants are typically, I mean, the first time in my life I heard about migrants were migratory birds, people who fly from one place to another because it gets cold and then they move to warmer places. I think that was the name given to us migrants, unknowingly or knowingly, has sort of defined our existence. The liberal narrative in India today, I mean, what we are seeing here is not the mainstream narrative. The liberal narrative in India today is that one fine morning we packed our bags, probably because after 5,000 years we realized that it gets too cold in Kashmir. So we packed our bags and left. Some kind of wanderlust, came upon us, and we decided to, find, like Dora the Explorer. We went out and we said, okay, now let's find out how people in Delhi live and how people in Chennai live. So that's one. Another thing that has been brought about is that a man called Jagmohan orchestrated our exodus. First of all, they won't even say that there is an exodus. When you push them to the corner and tell them, listen, this is what I've gone through, this is my story, then they will very, with a lot of difficulty accept, but then they will come back and say, well, Jammu facilitated it for you. I was in Kashmir on 19th January 1990, a middle-class family in Srinagar. People who know around there, who know India and Kashmir at that time, know that there were not even phones available. हमारे घर में phone भी नहीं था. We did not have that regular rotary phone also, because even those phones, you had to pay a lot. You had to pay a lot of rishwat to some people to get it. So we did not even have a phone. And forget about internet and forget about social media and all this. You need to get a lot of people forget that. So we were living in an information vacuum, and yet these 3.5 lakh Kashmiri Pandits just pack their bags and leave. Can anyone imagine what we must have gone through? And we are told Jagmohan, who was not even in Kashmir at that time, who was still in Jammu, somehow he sent messages on hotline, WhatsApp tha shayad, and we saw the messages and we packed our bags and we left. So that is the liberal narrative we are suffering from. So my problem today is that, yeah, first of all, start from the beginning. Call us internally displaced or refugees. That is the first thing. That has not been done till now. Even in official communication, when this, and I will talk about Article 370 briefly, I don't have much time, and this domicile laws. If you look at the wording that is there, the first thing that came upon this was migrants. All migrants who have gone out of since 1944 will come back. We are not migrants, we are refugees. We have been thrown out, we did not go out on our own. So this has to be, first of all, Indian government has to accept that. Even that has not been accepted. After that, they have to accept, there has to be one story of why we left. There are numerous stories about why we left. There is only one story why we left. We are not economic refugees. We did not leave for better economic opportunities. We left because our lives were in danger. On 19th January 1990, I call myself a child of conflict, and so is Sanjay, and so is Ashish. As a child of the conflict, and as a woman, as a girl at that time, I mean, a young girl at that time, I realized the horror of being a woman stuck in a jihad. My own grandfather, he picked up, who had not hurt a fly in his life, and this story has become quite popular now, but he actually picked up old rusted axe and 2 kitchen knives on that night of 19th January 1990, when every single mosque in Kashmir was blaring slogans like "Hum kya chahte azadi, yahan kya chalega nizam Mustafa, Pakistan se rishta kya, la ilaha illallah." These are slogans that I have heard. And in Kashmiri, the one slogan that just completely, one reason why we left was this one slogan that has been constantly, that stuck a nail in our hearts, was "Aise Panui Pakistan, Bata Rusti Patninsan," which means that we need our Kashmir with Hindu women without their men. That is the kind of level of violence and terrorism and jihad that we have seen. There has been absolutely no acceptance of this fact. And I will move quickly to what has been happening, and I'll divide this into 2 parts. I have about a few minutes. So one is what Indian state is doing in Kashmir at the moment, and then the other part is what needs to be done about Kashmiri Hindus. The first part is that, besides, a lot of Indian governments have come and gone. Not much has happened about Kashmir issue as a whole, and Kashmiri Pandits and Kashmiri Hindus. This government has shown some resolve, and they, in one moment, in one stroke of pen, they abrogated Article 370. I have no time to get into the details of Article 370, but suffice it to know that what people say that it was a bridge between Kashmir and India was a lie that had been perpetrated. It was actually an impediment. It was an impediment that made sure that their, Kashmir and India, that we never became part of India, and this secessionism always stayed there. So this was actually a caveat in Indian Constitution, which ensured that the people of Kashmir never become part of India, and the secessionist tendencies always, are nurtured. So Article 370 gone, domicile laws, Article 335 gone, which meant that people from outside Kashmir could not by land, and you could not become a domicile of Kashmir. A state subject, which was, I have written about it. It was very difficult to acquire state subject. Even I have a state subject, and now it has not become. Now it's useless in the new laws. But I remember my mother had to go through a lot of greasing of palms to get me the state subject, even though I was born in Kashmir and my family, we are Kashmiri Hindus. So all that was bureaucratic nonsense. So all that has gone away now. A reorganization of state has happened. Kashmir and Jammu Kashmir is one union territory now. Ladakh is another union territory. And these steps are bold indeed. There is no question about it. In fact, one of the reasons why we are seeing what we are seeing in Eastern Ladakh right now, one of the reasons is because Ladakh has been the reorganization of Ladakh and the union territory status and all that, but that's beyond the focus, beyond the scope of this discussion. So all these were constitutional or hurdles on the paper. And I am very cognizant of the fact that it was very important to do this. The domicile laws have increased the number of people who can claim domicility to Kashmir. So there is West Pakistan refugees, there is Safai Karamcharis who had been brought from Punjab but could never become state subjects. So now all this domicility has increased. Well and good, that's wonderful. There are 15 years of, and a lot of people, I know Ashish had a lot of issues with why 15 years, period of becoming a domicile, it should be immediate. And that's a very valid school of thought. I have said again that, well, in Kashmir, one thing you have to realize now is that Jammu and Kashmir is open to people, and you don't need a constitutional amendment now to change this 15 years. We can all, we've struggled, we can always struggle more and say that, listen, 15 years is not right. It doesn't need a constitutional amendment right now. It's an executive decision. All said and done, what does this do to the Kashmiri Hindus? And I have to say, I even said it when 370 was removed, not much. It does not do much for us for the simple reason that our story is not even acknowledged. How can you help people, even though you have good intentions, if you are not going to acknowledge our story first? If you are not going to say why we left, who are we, first of all? We are the original aborigines of Kashmir. First of all, accept that. Who are we? Why did we leave? Why were we killed? And what is next for us? Who killed us? First of all, who killed us and why we were killed? These two things are very important. And Indian government has always shied away from this. And that is something that we all have to work hard on. And I have in my writing for years said that we need a special investigation team and SIT to be instituted on our exodus, the only exodus that independent India has seen. And in that SIT, I wish people would go back to that period of 1990, think what happened, investigate what happened, because we are losing time. A lot of people who saw this are now in the increased years of their life. We will not have first-person testimonies anytime soon. People think that we have all the time in the world. We don't. People who were going to give, my grandfather now is dead. My grandmother is on the last stages of her life. My mother is now retired. I am getting old. We don't have many we will not have first-person testimonies left very soon. So there needs to be an SIT where people can talk to people, and you have to bridge this. In our mind, we know exactly what happened to us, but we need one official narrative so that this jigsaw puzzle is put together about who are we, why were we thrown out, and who threw us out. The second part that SIT needs to do is punish people who threw us out after you have identified them. There are people who have accepted their crime of killing Kashmiri Hindus. An interesting and a fascinating story that I must tell you is that Yasin Malik is in jail not for killing Kashmiri Hindus. He is in jail for terror funding. Is this black humor or what is this? He is not in jail for killing 4 IAF officers and other people that he has acknowledged in the BBC interview. No one has been able to put him on dock for that, or by his own admission. Bita Karate. Again, these are people that we know. There are other people, other terrorists like that who are roaming around free. I want to know from this, forums like this, when they tell us that you have to go back, we have to go back where our killers are roaming free. How is that possible? Unless there is some sense of justice, there can be no reconciliation. How can you expect a community that has been aggrieved so much, that has been tortured so much? Forget about Ashish did bring in the, since 14th century, which is true. I'm talking about this current exodus since 1990. Unless you are going to hold people responsible, unless law of the land is going to be applied to them, this reconciliation is not going to happen, and there is going to be no solution going forward. Yes, Article 370, domicile laws, all that helps. I'm not saying it doesn't help, but a lot more needs to be done as far as Kashmiri Pandits are concerned, Kashmiri Hindus are concerned. We need to be first acknowledged. As Ashish always says, we are forgotten people. These forgotten people first need to be acknowledged, that here is your story, not just, oh, here, I suddenly see that this has become a very interesting notion every time, and something happens somewhere, and a lot of our well-meaning friends will say, but what about Kashmiri Pandits? Yes, what about Kashmiri Pandits? But how much do you know what happened to us? That's not where it should end. It should not end at what happened to Kashmir, what about Kashmiri Pandits. It needs to end at who killed us, what happened to us. That's very important. And unless that is done, I end this not on a very happy note, and not on a very positive note, because as I said, from Mr. Suri's killing to Mr. Pandita's killing, we still have unidentified people killing us. Have you heard anywhere justice for Ajay Pandita? Have you heard anywhere in the narrative that we need the killers of Justice Pandita, the killers of Ajay Pandita to be identified? No one. Not one person has put out placards to put pressure on the government that who are these people? TRF, one terrorist organization, self-identified themselves that we killed. Ahsan kar diya, ki hum hi ne mara. But the Indian government has not told us till now who killed Ajay Pandita. This is happening in 2020. How are we to go back? That's my question. And how are we to reconcile without any justice? And I end that note. I'm not sure if I took more time, but this is how it is. I apologize.
No. Thank you, Sananda ji. It was a very passionate talk. We could feel all the emotions, and we totally empathize with you. I just have one question for you. What efforts are being done by the Kashmiri Network worldwide to help the future generations understand the history and truth of Kashmir, like how Sanjay ji said that people are growing in different parts of the world, right? And it's a game of narratives. So other side is constantly churning out stories. So what efforts are being done there?
The first thing we did was we stayed alive. That is our biggest contribution to our story. We stayed alive. If we had not stayed there, we would have all been murdered. And today, JK Study Circle would not be doing this, because they would not have even known that there were any Kashmiri Hindus anywhere. So our first line of resistance was we ran away and we stayed alive to tell our story. Sometimes a lot of people tell me that, अरे वहीं पे रहना था ना, आप भाग क्यों गए, आपने लड़ाई क्यों नहीं की, आपने guns क्यों नहीं उठाए? People don't understand that when the demographics are placed like that, we are just over the period of time, we were just 5% of the population in 1990. Now we're not even 1%. And in that 95% of the population, about 10% of the population had AK-47s and Kalashnikovs. The rest of the population, 80%, was supporting the people. So not everyone took a gun, but everyone supported them. Most of them, at least. That is how Girija Tikku was killed. That is how engineer B.K. Ganju was killed, whose testimonies I have again and again said. So, terrorism or jihad does not, penetrate anywhere if it does not have local support. So that local support that existed in 1990, which cannot be denied, we had to escape from that. So we stayed alive, first of all. Second, I have to tell you, I have been in this quote unquote business for a long time. It's only now that our stories are being told. It's only now, Ashish will remember and Sanjay will remember. It's only now that people call us to talk. It's only now that our articles are being published by mainstream newspapers. This is very new. For 25 years, we were still telling people कि हम लोग ताला लगा के बाहर घर से निकले हैं. कई लोगों ने तो ताला भी नहीं लगाया. So I am still, my mother still has, by the way, keys of her Kashmir home, which has already been taken over, but she keeps her keys. Those old brass keys. Sanjay will remember and Ajay will remember. They had those brass keys. They're not sleek talas like now. So she keeps that. So she, more than the house that she lives in Delhi right now, वो चाबी तो कई बार हो चुकी है, and we've gotten that made again. वो कश्मीर वाली चाबी कभी नहीं घूमी. Never. She keeps that close to her heart because she thinks she's going to go back. So 25 saal to we have been trying to tell people what happened to us. Please listen. It's only now with the advent, technology has helped us. Once internet opened up, a lot of us started blogging because mainstream media had completely, blackened us out. So a lot of us started blogging then, and stories came out and people started chronicling. That's when it happened. This is only 10 or 15 years at the most that our stories are being told. Before that, we were not even a speck anywhere. And one example I will give you is whenever they used to talk about Kashmir about 10 years ago, कि मसला Kashmir का कुछ हल चाहिए, the people on the table used to be the Indian government and the separatists and the terrorists. There was no Kashmiri Hindu representation anywhere. There was not even a Dogra representation, by the way. There was only the masla or the problem was only between government of India and the terrorists. There was no problem anywhere else because we were not even called to the table. We were not even told that what is the problem. It's only now that we've been screaming, and it's only because Ashish sings songs now. So a lot of it gets out and Sanjay makes films. But that is now. It hasn't happened before. So one of the things that we are doing is we are telling our stories, we are staying alive, and we have kept our culture alive in our children. And because we know that the baton has to be passed, and that's what we're doing. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you so much, Sunanda ji, for all your insightful comments. Thank you. We will now move on to hear some first-person testimonials. And I'll request all of you to please keep your talk to about 5 minutes because we are running short of time. We will begin with someone who has been a refugee from Pakistan, occupied Jammu and Kashmir, Vijay Kranti ji. He's a media professional for the past 50 years and has been a part of many national and international media groups. He is also an author and an internationally acclaimed photographer. He'll be bringing us the perspective of being a refugee from POJK. The floor is yours, Vijay ji.
Thank you. When Sunanda ji at one point said that KPs were the only, that was the only exodus, maybe I think it was, she said it in excitement. My story is actually the background of why, whether it is Sunanda ji or our other friends, why they became refugees. my father became refugee 3 times in his life and within Jammu and Kashmir. In 1931, when Sheikh Abdullah uh, joined politics in Jammu and Kashmir, that was the year when Maharaja of Kashmir had turned over the tables of the British in the Round Table Conference. He was the chairman, he was the president of the Prince's Council. So the British were very unhappy with the Maharaja. And they suddenly discovered a very energetic youth, Sheikh Abdullah, to do their work in Jammu and Kashmir. And this gentleman, uh, he joined the Muslim conference, and it, just to beat his senior colleagues in that party, and of course to do the British job to create problems for the Maharaja, he started a movement against not only against Hindus. His main demand was cow slaughter should be made open in Jammu and Kashmir, and he knew very much the Rajput Maharaja was not going to allow it. So the story of my community and my father started in 1931 when Sheikh Abdullah gave a call of cleansing the rural areas of Jammu and Kashmir of all Kafirs, which means Hindus. And there was a horrible massacre. 1931, my father was 2 years. He became refugee first time with his father. And his father was a very famous Hakim, Lala Mukandlal Gupta of that area. He was a famous Hakim. He was a great storyteller, very popular in his area, like our these days, our Kapil Sharma, or you have so many names heard. And he was a preacher of Quran in ordinary language. He was a Hindu. But when Sheikh Abdullah's goons came to all villages and they burnt Hindus' houses, looted their houses, and they were going to burn my grandfather's house, nobody, none of their neighbors, none of those villagers who used to invite my grandfather for, they would book him every year. Shaji, hamare gaon aana hai apne agli baar to do the preaching. Nobody came to help him. So my grandfather, my father, they became refugees in 1931. They had to run away from there because of thanks to Sheikh Abdullah. They migrated to Mirpur. And then my father and my grandfather became refugees in 1947. When India had, when Jammu and Kashmir had already joined India, partition fire was over. And still, the Hindus and Sikhs from all around Mirpur, there were about 42,000 of them who had come from all villages around and stayed in Mirpur, hoping that the state government, and that government was headed by again Sheikh Abdullah, will send some policeman, will send some Tharedar or some army, and they were holding Indian flag till the last day. And Sheikh Abdullah didn't send anybody there. And the result was when Pakistan and the so-called Kabilis attacked that area, out of 42,000, my father and grandfather, they were lucky. Out of 42,000, 18,000 people came alive to this part of Jammu and Kashmir. My parents, they lost their most beautiful daughter, and I don't know what happened to her at that time. So they became refugees second time. They became refugee next year in Jammu because the Indian army was called to help the state government to push back the Pakistanis. And a lot of army had come, their trucks were waiting there. They brought a lot of Gola Barud to help the state to save from Pakistan. And when this whole thing was over, when Srinagar was safe, Sheikh Abdullah comes from Srinagar and and he suddenly discovered that these refugees from Mirpur, Kotli, Bimbar, so many places, they had come and stayed in those houses which were left by the local unfortunate Muslims who were thrown out. And he was angry, how the hell these people can live in these houses? And his argument was that Kashmiriyat dilute ho jayegi. The Kashmiriyat will get diluted in the state, so I don't need these refugees. So he packed hundreds of them in military trucks and threw them into neighboring Punjab. My father became refugee for that. So, and after that, there was nobody to, like other refugees, these people have been running around. Once they settled in somewhere in Varanasi at Chinar Fort, and then some of them were taken to Yol camp. My father, a very young uh, boy, he found his own place for somewhere in Karnal, and then he migrated to Delhi, and he was living in a slum there, and he got married there, and I was born in that slum. So now the story starts. This is the background to tell you that in Kashmir, the atmosphere was already there. It was not because of the old history of a fight between Islam and the non or the Kafirs. It was already there. It was a very modern and educated chief minister who whose game plan resulted into my family becoming refugee 3 times. And what happened after that is with the whole society. Our problem is we did not only we lost our motherland, we not only we lost our roots. Our problem is we were not accepted as refugees even by the central government because they had their own reason. They didn't want to acknowledge people from Mirpur, Bhimber, Kotli, Muzaffarabad, Dev Batala, etc., as refugees from Pakistan. Because if the moment they do it, they will accept Pakistan's uh, control over sovereignty over our part of Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So they didn't want it. My father took many delegations to various leaders, including once to Sheikh Abdullah. And the way he treated these young people, he said, Tum kya refugee? What the hell? Why do you call yourself refugees? He said, we came from Mirpur. He said, have you ever seen the map of India? And they brought map of India. He said, put your finger, where is Mirpur? And he put the finger. He said, isn't it India? Because that is India. India never gave up claim on Mirpur. And it was always on the map. And Sheikh Abdullah and central government will not accept these people from Pakistan occupied Jammu Kashmir as even refugees because they didn't want to lose their claim on that area, but they didn't want those people. So till today, none of us is accepted as refugees. The state government of Jammu and Kashmir, all governments, they bluntly refuse to accept us, and our number has been increasing because most of the Hindus who had migrated from POJK to Jammu Kashmir, initially they lived with their relatives and tried to find some jobs, and they didn't find much comfort there. So slowly they have been moving out. And today the number of these people is far beyond 1 million. POJK refugees who are not living in Jammu and Kashmir, they are 1 million, and whatever reason, none of them is Muslim. Everybody is either Hindu or Sikh. They are not acceptable to the central government of India. They were not acceptable to Jammu and Kashmir. So my father tried to have my son, my younger brother, admitted in engineering college in Jammu and Kashmir, but they refused because he was not a state subject. I tried, and they said, "Where is your state subject?" I applied for it, and the basic requirement is the ration card of Jammu and Kashmir. When they kicked out my father in 1948, he didn't have the time and energy to come back one day to just get a ration card. So because he doesn't have a ration card or identity of this kind, so none of these 1 million plus people have identity to be acknowledged even as children of Jammu and Kashmir. At one stage, the government of Jammu, the World Bank, when they financed Mangala Dam in Mirpur, my parents' place, their basic condition was that every person who loses, every family who loses their land into the dam must be compensated. So that was the time World Bank offered money to the people from Mirpur and Kotli, those areas. The Indian government, central government, refused to let them go to World Bank office because the moment you accept their claim, their money, we will be acknowledging that POJK is part of Pakistan. The refugees who came from West Pakistan, Punjab, Sindh, Multan, those who came from East Pakistan, they were accepted as refugees, and they were given compensation, whatever it was, for the lands and properties they left there. Because these POJK people were not even accepted as refugees, so they never had any claim over anything. So they had to fend for themselves. So the result today is that more than 1 million POJK people are left without any identity. Now the government, central government has come up with a domicile law, and they are demanding certain documents. Let us see those people who survived, who still have some document. They will have the satisfaction of going to the Jammu and Kashmir government and becoming uh, getting the domicile there. So which means you get the identity of being the child of Jammu and Kashmir. So now the tragedy is these people are today not interested in getting any compensation because that is has become irrelevant. You give me 1 lakh rupees, 5 lakh rupees, 10 lakh rupees, it makes no difference to me today. It would have made difference to my father, my grandfather, who could have started something. So today it is meaningless. We are not interested in that. We want, please accept me as child of Jammu and Kashmir. So, but this is the not only one problem. We don't have any rights in Jammu and Kashmir. There were people who were living for generations. Very quickly, I want to give an introduction to some communities who are, there are, today there are about 7 kind of refugees in Jammu and Kashmir. 4 of them are Pakistan occupied Jammu Kashmir refugees who are settled today in Jammu and Kashmir. The other part of the community who is larger than that are settled outside Jammu and Kashmir and have no identity. Of course, we know Kashmiri Pandits, their case, and the Kashmiri Sikhs, we know their case. They are another. West Pakistan refugees are there. I don't want to go into the background of how they came there. But people living for 70 years, 3 generations are born there, and they don't get even the identity. The state government does not give them, consider them as a citizen of Jammu and Kashmir. They don't get them voting rights. They can, because they are citizens of India, they can vote for Lok Sabha. They cannot vote for the assembly, for the panchayat. Even they can be member of cooperatives. Their children cannot go to the take admission in state-run schools because they are not state subjects. And the worst situation is another case of the Valmiki. The word which is not today acceptable, but originally they were as Bhangis. So they were brought from Punjab by Sheikh Abdullah, pleaded with them, please come, we have problems. You settle here, we'll give you state citizenship, we'll give you jobs, we'll give you money, we'll give you comfort. And can you believe what is happening in Jammu and Kashmir today? Those children who were born to the families of these Valmikis, the community who were brought in from Punjab by the chief minister personally, they have no right to any get admission in the state schools, the senior educational institutions. And the child, the moment a child is born and is issued a certificate, they used to put a stamp on that, on his kind of birth certificate or so-called citizenship certificate, eligible for only for a Bhangi job. Can it happen in a country like India? Can we imagine 70 years after India becomes independent, a child who is born in Jammu to a Valmiki family, if he or she, the family sends them to Chandigarh, to Delhi or Bombay, and they become a medical student, he or she comes back as a doctor, he or she comes back as a professor, or he or she comes back as a business management expert, they can take only a Bhangi's job in Jammu and Kashmir government today. The same fate is met by those many thousands of Gorkha soldiers who were soldiers in the army of Maharaja. They came at least more than 150 years ago to Jammu and Kashmir. Today, they have no right to anything. All these communities are not allowed even to send their children for senior studies. You can't apply for jobs. You cannot vote in a panchayat or a municipal election or in the state assembly. And the worst thing is with POJK, coming back to my community, POJK society has, the state government of Jammu and Kashmir, right now, if you see the assembly, there are 111 seats in the assembly. The elections take place only on 87. Why? 24 seats are left unfilled in the hope or in the name of POJK. When POJK comes back to India, we will fill these seats. Why not today? Why not with the POJK refugees who are here? No, they will not here. And the result is, out of 111 seats, 87 seats, there are elections. 46 seats out of 87, 46 out of 87 are reserved for Kashmir Valley, which means throughout they have the absolute majority. They can make any laws, whatever. And Jammu has 37 seats, Ladakh has only 4. So the result is all the laws, all the rules which are made for the citizens of Jammu and Kashmir, they are made by the Kashmiri majority in the assembly. Today, if somebody goes to the website of Election Commission, you will be shocked to see that in whole India, Kashmir is the only place where all the 46 members are Muslims. There is nobody there. Not only this, I am a journalist. If I tell you that in Jammu and Kashmir, in the Kashmir government accredited list of reporters and correspondents, there are 172 journalists who have been accredited. Will you believe 170 out of 172, 170 out of 172 are Muslims, Kashmiris. It is total ethnic cleansing of the media. Times of India, Indian Express, New York Times, Hindustan Times, Outlook, the Hindu. You name the magazine, you name the TV, even the Chinese news agencies, all their correspondents are Kashmiri Muslims. I am not against Kashmiri Muslims, but does it mean that there should be total cleansing of the media? That is why you are getting, when my friends are talking about what happened to Kashmir and nobody listened to us for 60 years, this is why nobody listened to you, nobody listened to us, because the entire narrative was in the hands of these journalists, who are 170 out of 172. So this is, I know this story can go very long. Now the domicile law has come. I'm concluding that the domicile law has come. We feel very happy. My father waited, but unfortunately, only 50 days before 370 was abrogated, my father died. He couldn't see that day. Before dying, he had lost his speech, he had lost his eyesight and could very badly hear. He would sit with TV very glued to it to hear if there is any news of Kashmir. And it didn't come. And he would ask me, "Vijay, ye Modi kuch karega?" These were the only words he spoke for 2, 3, 4 months, last month. And Modi didn't do. Unfortunately, fortunately, Modi did something which is miraculous, wonderful. I wish my father was alive to hear that. But now, it's a very good beginning. But as Sudandaji said, the beginning is not enough. All this injustice which has happened to the generation, it has to be probed, and people who are responsible, they should be brought to justice. And the justice should be done to these communities. I'm sorry I've taken more time than what you had for.
No worries, Vijayji. No, thank you so much for your very informative, and it was quite agonizing to hear that also. No, thank you so much for sharing those deep thoughts. Is it okay if we just extend by about 10-15 minutes? I would just quickly ask my the other fellow speakers.
Yeah.
Okay. So quickly, we will now ask Dr. Minesh Khasuji, who's working with NHS here in the UK, to share his first-person testimonial. Mineshji, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you to Vinodji and JKSC for inviting me. And I'll partly share my personal testimonial, but talk a bit about general stuff, which some of the esteemed speakers have already spoken about. And I will want to leave you with a couple of short poems in Kashmiri, which I think are quite important, because as we know, images and poems say much more and much better what we can't say otherwise. I guess the first question is why we became refugees, though we still haven't been given that right to call ourselves refugees. We largely had three choices: either to convert or to die or to become a refugee. And I'm sorry we chose either the second or the third option. I can only apologize. We became refugees rather than taking some of the other options. And I think it's quite important, and some of my esteemed panel members have been highlighting this over the last few years, that this is about a genocide. This is not migration. This is about an exodus, and the exodus is part of a genocide. And I think it is quite important to understand for people who perhaps were not there, there was a significant brutality in this genocide. Even brutality which has not been seen in other parts of the world in terrorism. To give you an example, I have never seen in any other part of the world a live person being dismembered on a wood saw. It was one of my Kashmiri sisters who was alive and she was broken into bits on a wood saw. No other part of the world, even despite a lot of terrorism, has seen that. It was one of our sisters who was made to drink blood of her dead husband, which was mixed with rice. This hasn't happened anywhere else in the world. So I think it is important to understand the brutality of what happened. And the second bit is to understand the systemic nature of what happened. It wasn't a single event. I think, as Ashish repeatedly says, this is not one event or one episode. This is a systematic way in which a genocide was generated over time. So I think we need to understand those two things quite importantly. And to get a better feel of how it impacted us, I'm going to potentially use, let me see if I can share my screen. I'm going to potentially use, not able to get onto my screen. I wanted to use actually the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Anyway, let's not worry about that.
You can now share your screen if you try it again, Minishji.
Okay, let me have a look again. Can we see that now? Are we able to see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs in a scientific way, the first lowest needs are so-called biological and physiological needs. So we were all deprived as refugees initially of food, of sleep, of water. We were deprived of our security, our health, our finances. People don't understand that even though those people who survive, we have wiped at least 1 or 2 decades of people's lives. The amount of physical and mental illness in our refugees was over the roof. To talk about finances, we were uprooted. My parents built a house over 3 to 4 years in Kashmir. We stayed in that house one night. It is the costliest one-night stay in the world. Forget the emotional attachment, just in terms of money, it's the costliest one-night stay in the world. If you look at the next level of hierarchy of needs, friendships, intimacy, family connections, we are scattered, we're disrupted. We rarely get to have a togetherness together, even at marriages and stuff. We're so far apart, we don't see ourselves socially as we would normally wanted. But most importantly, in that belonging bit is understanding how important it is for our health to have roots. We are somebody's son, we're somebody's brother, we're somebody's grandson. That's an important part of who we are, and we were totally uprooted in what happened in the last sort of 30, 50 years. The other important thing to understand as well is, if you look to the next level, it is self-esteem. A lot of who we were was taken away from us. It was just vaporized. All our recognition was taken away. If you look at the number of cancers that Kashmiri Hindus and refugees have had. These are off the roof, and this is perhaps related to basically epigenetic mechanisms which stress induces, and we've lost a lot of our folk. The ones who have arrived have had physical and mental illnesses go off the roof, and now we're going on a cancer epidemic as well. And if you look then at the highest level of self-actualization in terms of Maslow's hierarchy, I think it's important to understand that Kashmir was spiritually a very rich place. If you look at Sharda Peeth, if you look at why did people like Shankaracharya have so much devotion for Kashmir, because Kashmir was a special place and nobody has the right to take that away from me. I'm going to stop sharing this, and I just want to leave you with a couple of short poems. I normally write poetry in English or Hindi, but in the last year I've started writing in Kashmiri, largely to keep with my Kashmiri roots. So I hope you can hear this well. These are two very short poems.
Manishji, we can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
No.
Okay.
Shall we move on then, Minishji?
Just give me a second. Yeah, just give me a second. If we can't do it, then I think I will move on and we can come back to it later.
Okay.
Let's try it one more time. If it doesn't work, then we'll move on.
But os asan mata magsal was his God, other country. Koini pet thavan dayatrazas arpan Sari bon Umjilavan Sari Hosh us Mumbai Mans Kangri hat Orzu to Dorkotos Rove Sori Shayat it is owned huge percent.
There's another quick short poem and then I'll be done. Thank you.
Zas Kate, Zas Kazi, Musran Post. Zindagi us Shalimar, Habitar, Ocean Bahar. Rovum Kazi Jar, Ulmun Ganpatiyar. Rovum Kazi Jar. Minisha Makar Magzan Anchar Lone Chukya Chuchukuchon Waktuk Nyandachuk Deitra Shafchui Akanandun.
Thank you very much. Sorry for the technical difficulties.
No worries, Manishji. I mean, I couldn't understand the language, but I could feel all the emotions. So thank you so much. And also love the whole Maslow's hierarchy. It was a beautiful way of explaining the whole situation. Thank you. Thank you so much. We just have our last speaker for the day now, Pratiksha. She is a postgraduate researcher at Cardiff University, and she has documented many first-person accounts as part of her project, and she'll be sharing a couple with us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Shwetaji, and thank you, Vinodya, for inviting me to speak. It's an honor indeed. Just before I start, I'll try to keep it really short. The one concern that everyone here has been pointing at consistently is that of acknowledgement. My story, very interestingly, is not even close to any of you. Till my late teens, I did not even know of Kashmiri Hindus. I am one of those guilty teens, primarily because I had not heard of anything, right? And I was working on partition in my undergraduate and master's, women in partition, and I was suddenly dawned on me that I should look at stories of women from Kashmir because it was practically torn apart. And apart from one book by someone called Suniti Bakshi, who was also, like myself, an outsider looking in, I could find none, absolutely none. There was Krishna Mehta and there was Suniti Bakshi, and that's about it. So that is when it dawned on me, and the concern that Sunandaji has excellently raised, that our grandfathers and grandmothers are gone, our parents are suffering, and my parents personally are also growing old. So who will be left to tell those stories? And interestingly, at that time, I started something called Kashmir Untold, which was supposed to be a digital museum of not just Kashmiri Hindu stories, but of different communities from Kashmir, including Muslims who were forced to migrate from Jammu in 1931. I'll just share my screen briefly. Can you all see it?
Yes.
Right, perfect. So I have been very kindly supported by a few organizations, but yeah, so my attempt is to represent Kashmir and basically create a platform where we include oral histories from all communities who were forced to move out of Kashmir and vacate their homes. And that we turn how cinema or popular media has represented Kashmir, which is primarily a focus on landscape or just presenting it as a land induced with terror and nothing else. So no culture, no people, nothing of that sort, just beauty or terror. Right. So when I started, I was a 22-year-old and I did not know how to start these conversations with people who were at least 40 plus. I mean, I can't sit in their drawing rooms and ask them, please tell me what happened to you, because these are stories that were traumatic enough. I think I shared the wrong slide. Yeah, these were extremely traumatic stories. So I devised a way to do it. I used to ask them about the objects they carried. So some objects were as mundane as a pen that they could carry because, like everyone just said, they were just given one night to pack everything and move. So mundane objects like pen, books, even old photographs were carried and were preserved. In fact, as Sunandaji said, I also have two families who've kept the keys to their homes. And as she rightly pointed out, the keys to like regular stuff gets lost, but that key is not lost at all, right? Even 30 years after that. I'll just recount three stories, two of the horrors and one of slight hope. But just before that, I want to give credits to a few people here. This is one old photograph that has been preserved by a family. This was shared by Bhavuk Pandita. He runs an Instagram channel called Kashmiri Pandits, and he preserves very old photographs. This was one of the stories I archived. She's a first person, this was a first generation testimony, which was rare. She did not really want to talk a lot about conflict, so I did not push in, but just in her family, I could introduce two conflicts. She was a Kashmiri Hindu who was forced to move out, and her husband was forced to move out from POK. So we had both the conflicts coming in, and both of them, very interestingly, brought utensils with their parents' and grandparents' names inscribed on them. So they have still preserved. The utensils are still being used as the mark of the homeland that they had once lost. The three stories that I want to share, I'll be very brief about them as well. One is by the second generation woman. I will not name her, but she told me she had two brothers. She was one when the Kashmiri Hindu exodus happened, but one of her brothers was 15-year-old and he was playing football in a ground. And suddenly, and these were all 14, 15-year-old boys. And all of them told him, you know what? The taps are poisoned. We are poisoning all the taps because we don't want you here. And imagine a 15-year-old, he ran home and he stopped everyone in his family. And he was scared and he told them, you know what? Do not drink water because all of this is poisoned. And his parents time and again consoled him, but in his own words, for 2 long days, he did not drink water because he was so scared. And even today, that's one of the nightmares that he faces, that, you know what, water is poisoned and someone close to me will die. So not only was it an active combat, it was also how children were passively affected by it. And those are stories that we come to hear now. Another one that she shared was just something that was very surprising for me as an outsider looking in. Her other brother was 4 years old when this happened. And as soon as he came to Delhi, he saw children going to school. And his first reaction was, "Yahan bacche school bhi jate hain." And she was surprised. She's an educator now. And I was surprised. And she told me that her brother, he was admitted in nursery and not even for a single day could he go to school because they did not feel safe. So he was shocked that people are going to school and something like school exists. So those are the stories I wanted to archive. The purpose for this digital museum, along with preserving those stories that might be lost in another 10 or 20 years, is an attempt towards peace building. Just by acknowledging that something happened, I do not raise questions like who did it, because that's not within my reach. But just the fact, the primary question has to be, hi, something happened. Just that acknowledgement maybe could be the first step towards peace building, in my opinion, because even that has not happened to many communities, like the people from Pakistan, like even people, the Purkhis from Ladakh, where margins shifted within one night and they became, from Indians, they became Pakistanis. So some stories still need that. And the second is to build awareness. So that is what I'm trying to do here. And the last story, which gives me some hope, is the one I would share, was of the woman that I first showed you. She was, I think she was pregnant in her full term when she was leaving. This gives me a little hope when I heard this. So mob came after her family. Her father was killed and she was being searched for. A Muslim woman protected her, kept her inside her house. And when the mob came to that Muslim family, that woman stood on the door and said, if you want to lay a hand over that girl, and this was after January, she did not migrate till then. But she said, if you want to lay a hand there, you will have to kill me first. And the mob went away because they could not. And that very night, she told her sons to leave this woman to Jammu very safely, that nothing happens to that woman. So perhaps just that acknowledgement of stories could be the first step. And that's the first step I'm trying to take. I'd request if Sunandaji and others could share any objects that you have with us. Thank you. That's about it.
Thank you, Pratiksha, for sharing those stories. And I mean, great that you're capturing those things and those stories before they get all lost. We need to pass them on. So thank you so much. That would bring us to the end of our session. I mean, thank you to all our speakers today, who you all shared your personal stories. And I think that we relived all your experiences and we could feel all shivers down our spines. So we salute your courage, your determination with which you have rebuilt your lives. Before I conclude, I will just quickly call my colleague, Vinod Tikkuji, for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Shwetaji. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of our panelists and those who joined us to give us their first-person testimonials today. This has been humble for me personally as well, because I am also a child of the conflict. The purpose of this webinar is to bring out some of these stories which have either been unheard, untold, or very less told, right? And it's not just what happened to Kashmiri Hindus 30 years ago or is still happening, but what is happening all around the region and how it is impacting all of us. This whole narrative of jihad, and I think in this webinar, as you all see, there is still a lot of anger which is in people, because even till today, people are not being recognized for what they've gone through. So somebody who is still being called a migrant, where he's had to flee for his life and doesn't get the status of even a refugee. If we reflect on that on World Refugee Today, I think that's the first step that needs to change. And from that journey to then looking at the recourse for going back and what it would mean in terms of rehabilitation, I think the judicial process definitely has to kick in as well. And all these points have come across in today's discussion by various panelists. They've all made this statement. I think I do want to conclude with 2 or 3 thoughts which all of us can take away. First thing is that, for last 20-25 years, the only story we used to hear from Jammu and Kashmir was of despair, was of conflict. And as I think Pratiksha also said, in the imagery, in film or in TV or in video, we would on one side see the beauty of the land, and on the other side we'd see the barbarism of the conflict. But we also, in the last 3 to 5 years, are now seeing a gradual wind of change. I think all of us will agree that the abrogation of Article 370 or its subclauses, or 35A as we may want to call it. Even my dad, when it happened, told me that in his lifetime, he had never anticipated this is going to change. So that, I think, was a great change in many ways for this wheel to start sort of unraveling, unturning, going back to where we started from. I think the government of the day has a number of other initiatives in the pipeline. The domicile policy has been talked about. We've heard from Vijay Krantiji about the discrimination against the Valmiki Samaj and other unprivileged communities in Jammu and Kashmir. A lot of them are going to get recourse through this domicile law. There may be certain lacunas and gaps in this policy still, and there is always scope to improve that. But it is a step change. Delimitation is in discussion. The fact that Jammu and Kashmir is now a union territory and there is a much more streamlined state-central relationship, that in itself gives a lot of hope to all of us. This is not the end of the journey. We all would want that one day Jammu and Kashmir represents the idea of democracy in its pristine way, but that is a long way away. But to get to that, first thing is that we need to keep telling these stories. We need to inform the world. We need to educate not just ourselves, but the entire world out there. And Jammu Kashmir Study Center is trying its best, trying its humble best to let those stories known. And it's not just for the region of Kashmir. We'll be running a seminar on 11th of July where we'll be focusing on certain areas of Jammu and Kashmir, like Gilgit-Baltistan, Hunza, and Nagar, provinces less talked about. And those stories also need to be told. On that note, I'd like to again thank all of you, and our apologies for the delay. Today we had some glitch in the beginning, and because of the emotional nature of these stories, it just does overrun sometimes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Namaskar, everybody. God bless all.
Just a leaving note, I'd like to read something from Gulzar Saab, if you allow me.
Absolutely, Sanjay.
Absolutely.
मेरी लिखी बातों को हर कोई समझ नहीं पाता, मेरी लिखी बातों को हर कोई समझ नहीं पाता, क्योंकि मैं एहसास लिखता हूँ और लोग अल्फाज पढ़ते हैं. So the difference between ehsas and alfaz.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
But today we had both. Yeah.
Ehsas and alfaz.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you
so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Namaskar.
Bye.